It took me 3 years, 4 months, and 7 days from when I first started my job to having my green card in hand. Now, a little bit of background to start. I'm a Canadian-born citizen who studied computer engineering at McMaster University. Now, based off of my degree, I qualified for the TN visa and started to work full-time in the US as a software engineer. If you want to go down a similar path like I did, where you're converting your work visa to a green card, you have to know that there are 3 main steps that you have to go through. The first step is the PERM process. The second step is the I-140, and the last step is the adjustment of status, or the form I-485. In this video, I'm going to assume you have a pretty good grasp on these immigration concepts, because if I were to explain everything, this video would be like an hour long. I also have a video on my channel where I explain the in-depth process to the best of my knowledge of each of these steps, and if you want to watch it, it will be the first link in the description. Now, I just want to remind everyone before we begin, I'm not a lawyer, just someone who went through the process themselves and decided to share their journey online. Now, if you have any actual questions regarding your case, reach out to a lawyer because they're worth the money. I started work on August 30th of 2021. My company started my immigration process day 1, and by September 11th, I was already filling out forms for the PERM. About a month later, on October 10th, I had finished filling out those forms and I sent it back to the lawyers. And by October 22nd, my employers asked me to submit some evaluation documents regarding my previous work experience as well as my education, just confirming that I had worked there and I had the degree, etc. At this time, they also told me that I'll be doing the labor market test in the cycle of December 2021. It took me a couple months to get all those documents together, and the final form that I sent was on January 18th, 2022. Also, a really quick disclaimer here, it's a little bit of a black box, the labor market test and the prevailing wage determination for me, because even though I did correspond back and forth with my lawyers at this time, there was no real updates on when they actually filed the labor market test or when I got back my prevailing wage determination. So I'm a little bit hazy on when I applied and when I got those things approved. But a couple months later, on April 15th, 2022, my lawyers had informed me that my labor market test had passed, and now we're going to start drafting the PERM application. And by April 25th, 2022 is when I filed my PERM application. So fast forward a little bit more than a year, it's now May 16th, 2023, and my lawyers have told me that my PERM has gotten approved by the Department of Labor. If you include gathering the documents, doing the questionnaire, and filing the labor market test and the prevailing wage determination, the total amount of time that I had to wait for my PERM process was 1 year, 8 months, and 5 days. Now, this took a pretty long time, and I think for the majority of people, unless you're born in a backlog country, the PERM is going to be the longest part of your green card process. Shout out to the user Getty on the Kangaroo Finance Discord. He actually reached out to a lawyer and asked what the average wait time is right now, and he was quoted 18 to 24 months for the whole entire PERM process, which includes the prevailing wage determination as well as the labor market test. I want to note that this is just one lawyer and one data point, so things could change depending on who you ask. During this stage, and with the green card in general, there are a lot of times where things are completely out of your control. However, it kind of emphasizes how on top of the ball you have to be for the things that you can control, like making sure there's no mistakes and getting things filed as accurately and as quickly as possible. The earlier you do the prevailing wage determination and get the labor market test filed, the earlier you're going to get your PERM, and therefore the earlier you're going to have your priority date. And having an early priority date makes all the difference when it comes to applying for your green card, because a shift in retrogression could literally be months, icing you out from either filing your green card or adjusting your green card. With my PERM application approved, we moved to the next stage of the green card process, which is the I-140. Really quick recap. It took me 1 year, 8 months, and 5 days to get my PERM application approved, and it was approved on May 16th, 2023. The day after, on May 17th, 2023, I started the paperwork to file for the I-140, and a month later, on June 16th, 2023, is when I filed for my I-140 with regular processing as a standalone document. Fast forward 3 months and 2 days, my I-140 application is approved on September 27th, 2023. All right, so a lot of things that I actually want to cover during the I-140 section, because this is where I see a lot of questions on Reddit and as well as in my Discord and people DMing me. So first off, in the final 2 stages of the green card, which is the I-140 and the I-485, you're actually able to file both of these steps concurrently. Additionally, the I-140 is the only time in the whole entire green card process where you can actually pay to win and pay money to get things done faster via I-140 premium processing. Now, I did neither of those things for a couple of reasons. The first thing is that when I got my PERM approved on May 16th, 2023, I knew that I had some international travel plans coming up later in the year. Now, I knew if I filed my I-485 at this time, even though I was current in both categories, I probably would not be able to get my advanced parole in time in order to travel. So I would lose out a bunch of money on tickets and as well as miss out going home for the holidays, which at that point in time, I really did not want to do. There's also the 90-day rule factor at play here, which means that you're not allowed to make any sort of immigration intent or immigration type moves within 90 days of entering the US, which means I would have to physically be present in the US for at least 90 days before filing for my I-485. And since I had been been traveling pretty frequently before that date, I probably would have to wait another couple months before I could file my I-485. But one thing to note is that your PERM approval actually kind of expires, and you have to file your I-140 within 6 months of your PERM being approved. Otherwise, it just gets scrapped. So after some back and forth with my lawyers, we decided the best course of action for my personal case was to file for the I-140 standalone. And when I came back in 2024, after my holidays were complete, I should file the I-485. And since I had to wait a couple months to file for my I-485 anyways, I decided to go with regular processing rather than premium processing for my I-140. Now, another really big question that I get around the I-140 is around immigrant intent and renewing your visa and traveling. I know this is a really big point of contention for a lot of TN visa holders because you could argue that the I-140 shows signs for immigrant intent, which means you could have some trouble re-entering the US on your TN visa because of this I-140 being filed, or you would have troubles renewing your TN visa because when you go to renew, they'll say, oh, you have immigrant intent with your I-140. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm not a lawyer and I'm only going to be sharing my personal experience, but I had no trouble renewing my TN or traveling while having an approved I-140. I left and re-entered the US a total of 2 times with an approved I-140 and never was questioned and never had an issue with it. This includes a time in October of 2023 when I got pulled into secondary inspection for an unrelated reason. In October 2023, I was re-entering the US from traveling in Thailand for about 3 weeks. I used the global entry line since I have a Nexus card, and once I got to the border agent, he looked at my stamps on my TN visa and he said, hey, something looks a little bit off. Do you have your TN visa package that you used to apply? And I told him, no, I don't have it. I got pre-approved by USCIS. And he's like, okay, that's fine. Can you show me your approval notice? And I was like, oh, I don't have that. He's like, okay, do you have a picture of it? And I was like, okay, let me look. So I looked on my phone and unfortunately I couldn't find one, which honestly is super on me. But he was like, okay, I'm going to have to search something on my computer. Things aren't looking like 100% right. I just want to make sure that you enter it properly. So can you please go to secondary inspection and we'll do it back there where the computers work. So I go to secondary inspection. I'm waiting for like 45 minutes because there's a bunch of other people in line in front of me. And they finally call out my name. They do some stuff on the computer and they're like, okay, your TN looks fine. Just always make sure to bring your approval notice or that package that you got approved with when you're traveling in and out of the US. But at no point during the process when I was at the border agent at the desk or when I was in secondary inspection did they mention me having an approved I-140. Now, I want to remind you again that I'm not a lawyer and this was just my own personal experience, so take what I say with a big grain of salt. Okay, so that was probably a lot of information. You probably forgot the timeline, so I'm going to do a quick refresher. In total, it took me 3 months and 2 days to get my I-140 approved, and it was approved on September 27th, 2023. All right, so let's fast forward a couple months. After I got my I-140 approved, I did a bunch of traveling, went home for the holidays, and returned back to the US on January 6th, 2024. A quick reminder about the 90-day rule. It basically says that you're not allowed to adjust your status or make any types of immigration moves within 90 days of entering the US. Otherwise, your initial visa might be seen as a misrepresentation. So if you do the math, 90 days from when I entered the US on January 6th would be April 5th, 2024. So while waiting within that 90-day period, I also decided to renew my TN visa. The reason for this is that my TN visa has a validity of 3 years, and I believe I had gotten it sometime in July of 2021. So that means there was a chance that my TN visa could expire, and I would not have my EAD at that time, which means I'd be working in the US without any legal status, which is a big no-no. So on February 2nd, 2024 is when I filed for my TN visa renewal via USCIS premium processing. And on February 7th, 5 days later, I got notice that my TN visa was approved and I was renewed for another 3 years. So fast forward a month, it's now March 12th, 2024, and I'm now doing a medical examination in order to file for my adjustment of status. So as part of the green card process in the final stage, you have to also submit a medical form, which basically says that you're up to date on all the vaccines and they do a medical examination on you as well. Technically, you don't have to file this with your I-485, but I knew that they were going to ask for this later on in the process. So I was like, okay, might as well just send it with my adjustment of status application as well, right? At this point in time, my lawyers also sent me a bunch of files to sign. So I ended up signing those documents and sending them back along with that medical form. So fast forward a month, now it's April 15th, 2024. 10 days after my 90-day rule has been up, which means I'm able to file for my I-485. At this time, my priority date for filing was obviously current because I filed, but my final action date was not yet current. A couple days later, on April 17th, 2024, I got a request for biometrics from the USCIS, which basically means go take a fingerprint and go take your photo. And on May 20th, 2024 is when I completed those biometrics and it was sent to USCIS. 4 days later, on May 24th, 2024, I was sent an RFE, which stands for Request for Evidence. And this was regarding my medical forms as well as my long birth certificate. So I'm not really sure why they asked me for my medical again, considering that I sent it with my initial packet. But, no questions asked for the government. I just sent my medical forms again, and then also sent my long birth certificate, which at this time I had acquired. Took a couple things to get everything in order and sent over. So by June 3rd, 2024 is when we sent that document back to USCIS. Now I want to note that even though they asked for an RFE, there was no update in my portal that the RFE had been received or anything like that. The most recent thing that showed on my USCIS portal was that my fingerprints had been added to my file, and it basically stayed that way until I got my green card approved. Fast forward a couple months, it's now July 11th, 2024, and my EAD got approved. And on July 17th, 2024, it got delivered and had the card in hand. Now at this time, I could finally start making side income from my YouTube channel, because before I was on the TN visa, which you're not allowed to have side income on. Now, unfortunately, I'm not yet monetized, so this is a gentle reminder to please consider liking and subscribing if you like the content. I also do want to make a note at this point is that while you have your EAD, it does not mean that you're able to just work for any company that you want, and I'll expand a little bit more on this later in the video. So in total, it took me 3 months and 2 days to get my EAD approved and delivered. Fast forward a couple months, it's now September 23rd, 2024, and I got my advanced parole approved. And by October 13th, 2024, I had the advanced parole in hand, which means I could finally now leave the States and travel. In total, it took me 5 months and 28 days to get my advanced parole after I had filed for my I-485. At this time, my priority date also became current for final action, which was released in the October 1st bulletin. With my advanced parole in hand, I did do some traveling, leaving the States and coming back a total of 2 times. And on December 13th, 2024 is the first time that I used my advanced parole to re-enter the US. Using the advanced parole was pretty chill. One note that I have to make about this is that once you use it, you do have to go to secondary inspection. And for me, the first time it took around 30 to 40 minutes. And the second time I would say around 20 to 30 minutes of waiting. Now, once I was in secondary, it was pretty chill. Just asked me a couple questions and they stamped it and just said, hey, every time you enter the US, make sure to use your advanced parole unless you get your green card. Then once you get your green card, only enter the US using your green card. So finally, after 3 years and 4 months of waiting, my green card is approved on December 30th, 2024, which is like 2 days before the new year, which is kind of crazy. And on January 6th, 2025, my green card was delivered. So in total, the amount of time that I had to wait for my adjustment of status was 8 months and 22 days. And if you count all the time I had to wait beforehand for the 90-day rule, it took just about a year. Now, most of the time on the I-485 was actually waiting for my priority date to become current, which took around 8 months to do. And if you do the math, after my priority date became current in October, it took around 3 months for me to get an approved I-485. Okay, so let's go over some notes for the adjustment of status because I have a lot to say. Now, in comparison to the PERM stage, this is actually a lot shorter, but way more stressful for me personally. And I think for me, what was most nerve-wracking was the fact that I was not able to leave the US and see my family, number one. And number two, I was so close to the end of the tunnel, but there was like literally nothing that I could do. And I felt really at mercy to the hands of USCIS. Now, another question that I want to talk about is actually applying for a new TN with an approved I-140. Now, I talked about traveling with an I-140 previously in the last section, but I was able to renew my TN visa while my I-140 was pending. I want to make a note that I did this via USCIS premium processing, and I have never applied for a TN visa at a port of entry. So I have no experience on that, and I don't know if that would have an effect on renewing your TN visa while you have an approved I-140. So if you're someone in the comments who's watching for some reason, even though they have their green card already, and have an approved I-140 and applied via the port of entry, please let me know in the comments so we can all learn from each other. Additionally, some people might ask, why did I not file for my TN visa after my I-485 was filed? And the reason for that is because I think once you file for the I-485, it is very clear, very, very clear immigrant intent because application is literally called application to adjust to a permanent resident. So at this point, I don't think it's very likely that you would get an approved TN renewal if you applied for it while having an I-485 adjustment of status application pending. And that also ties in with the question of what if my I-485 gets denied? Will I still be able to work on my TN? For both of those questions, I do not know the answer to, so I'm sorry. Now, another note that I want to make is that I could not travel outside of the US from January 6th all the way until September 23rd of 2024 when I got my advanced parole approved. This is one of the main drawbacks from adjusting your status from a TN visa to a green card rather than adjusting from an H-1B to a green card. If you're adjusting from an H-1B, that has dual intent, which means that you can travel using the H-1B in and out of the US. And on top of that, I don't think the 90-day rule applies to the H-1B visa as well because it has that dual intent. I'll go into a little bit more of the details later on in the video, but I also have a couple of videos on my channel explaining the differences between the TN and the H-1B specifically for Canadians. Now, another thing that I want to note is that USCIS will 100% ask you for a medical form once you submit your adjustment of status application. And whether you want to do that when they ask for it or if you want to do it beforehand, it's completely up to you. For me, I don't think it made that much of a difference because, like I said, I had to resend it once they asked for the RFE. And it did cost me an additional $50 to get it reprinted and resealed. But if it were up to me and I had to do it again, I would still do it the way that I did it because number one, it's only an additional $50 and there is no harm in filing it beforehand with your adjustment of status application, to my knowledge. Additionally, I would make sure that you prepare the long birth certificate before you file for your I-485 because they are going to ask you for that long form birth certificate, which includes your parents' date of birth as well as where they were born. And I'm just saying this as a heads up because for me, it took quite a while for me to get those forms from the Canadian government. So if you know that you're going to need them, I might as well get them done earlier in the process rather than, getting the RFE and stressing out about it. Okay, so just to summarize this last couple of parts, it took me 3 years and 4 months and 7 days to get my green card from the day I started working to the day I got my green card in hand. So I completely understand this is a ton of information to ingest all at once. So I will leave on screen this infographic that I made to try to disseminate all of the information as best as I can. Leave it on screen for a couple of seconds if you want to just take a look at it, pause, screenshot, whatever. I will also leave a link in the description. I don't know which number it will be in the description, but a link to a Reddit post where I will make a discussion around this topic as well if you're curious on checking that out. Now, before we jump into the FAQ, I just want to acknowledge how lucky and privileged I am to be able to take advantage of the green card process and on top of that, get it so fast. Crazy combination of me being born in Canada, me working at some very large tech company that starts sponsorship on day one, not getting audited, and having a very smooth process for my green card has all summed up to me getting the green card in 3 years and 4 months, which is very fast. Now, some additional advice that I have for people in the process or people who are trying to go through the process right now. Like I said, for me, the majority of my anxiety came from the adjustment of status part, which was the last part of the green card process, because that is the part where you're so close yet so far. Now, for me personally, I was checking USCIS daily, right? Like logging online to see if there was an update to my account. And one thing I've learned from investing as well as this immigration process is that you can only really control what you can control, right? Like you've done everything you can. And at the point where you filed your adjustment of status, there is literally nothing more that you can do. So any additional research that you go do on Reddit or every time you check USCIS is probably going to add more anxiety to your life rather than give you more information and help you make better decisions about something you can't even act on. So with that being said, my advice is to just try to take a chill pill and understand that this process takes time and it will happen when it happens. Now, that's kind of, like I said, an annoying thing for me to say considering I got it so fast. And you probably won't listen to me because even if I told myself this 3 years in the past or 1 year in the past, I would still check USCIS daily, but I just thought that I had to put it out there. Now here's some FAQ in no particular order. These questions come from my head that I've been thinking about the past years, months, whatever, as well as on Reddit, in my DMs, and on my Discord, which is a free space where we talk about personal finance, investing, and immigration if you're curious on joining. I'll leave it as the second link in my description. Now for this part, remember, I'm not a lawyer, just some dude who went through the process, and these are my interpretations. Can you move during the green card process? This answer is yes and no, and it depends. So since I moved to the US in 2021, I have moved every single year. All of those moves have been like within the same apartment, within the same area in Seattle. So I moved from one apartment to another and there was no issues with that. Now, if you want to move states, so recently I moved from Seattle to now New York, which is where I'm filming right now. That can only be done after 6 months of the I-485 process being filed. This is called the I-485 portability or AC21 if you want to Google it. And actually, I was about to go through that process of the I-485 portability or the AC21, but I got my green card before then, so I didn't have to end up pursuing it, which is, I guess, lucky for me. Now, the follow-up to that question is, can I switch jobs while applying for my green card? And again, the question is yes, no, and it depends. So everything for your green card process all ties back to the PERM application. And the PERM application is tied to a specific employer in a specific city or specific state. I'm not exactly sure. So switching jobs will most likely require you to refile the PERM. I'm sure that there are exceptions to this rule, but if you switch companies or switch locations, you're going to have to get a new PERM, which will restart the whole entire process for you from the very beginning. Now, there is that exception, like I said a bit earlier, with the AC21 I-141 I-485 portability, which means that after 6 months of filing for your I-485, you can switch companies or switch locations, assuming that it's close enough to what you initially filed your PERM for. Like I said, I didn't go through this process, but I know it's possible because other people have done it. But I believe that your new employer will also have to file some documentation for you. Now, the next question is around immigrant intent and the I-140 and the TN visa. I see this all the time on Reddit and it's discussed a lot. The majority of the question is, are you able to adjust your TN to your green card because that shows immigrant intent? That is obviously true. You can do that. Right here is the proof. The other question surrounding this is, can you renew your TN visa while you have an approved PERM or an approved I-140? Based off my experience and what the process I've been through, I think that it is possible just because I've done it and I know other people who have done it. But again, I'm not a lawyer. Next question, how much did this cost? For me, my employer paid for everything. And I think that your employer has to pay for everything for this process. I don't think that the employee can pay for this. It has to strictly be employer based, which is kind of why it's called employer sponsorship. The only thing I had to pay was for my civil surgeon to do the medical examination, which is around $300. And on top of that, I had to take some passport photos and do some expedited shipping. All in all, it probably cost me around $500. Next question. I have an approved PERM, but my priority date is backlogged. My category is not moving at all. Firstly, that sucks. I'm really sorry to hear that. I hope that you get current faster. One thing that I want to know is that based off my experience and my knowledge is that UCAS has a certain amount of green cards that they can give out a year per category. That's why the backlog exists. And they get a new allocation of visas on every beginning of their fiscal year, which happens in October. And to just throw my experience in there as well, is that my priority date was not current until it hit October 1st, and then it became current. Next question. What if I filed for I-485 and I-140 at the same time or filed concurrently? To answer that question, I might have gotten my green card a little bit earlier, but I think based off of my retrogression, it probably would have been around the same amount of time. Probably would have been able to get my EAD and my AP faster just based off of how much earlier I applied for it. But things ended up working out for me, so I have no complaints on how I personally did things. Next question. Why did I not upgrade to EB2 or EB2 natural interest waiver? Personally, I'm not qualified for either of those categories because I don't have the qualifications, but if you are qualified, I would look into it because the wait times for those categories are probably a little bit more selective, so it'll probably move a little bit faster. Next question. Is there anything I would do differently if I had to do it again? Probably not. I think things went as smooth as they possibly could have for me. The only thing I would do is get my long form birth certificate earlier rather than later, because now that I know I need to get it, I would get it as soon as possible. Next question. How much does your employer matter when applying for your green card? The answer to this is they matter a lot. Like, they matter the most. This is the most important thing in the whole entire green card process. They have to file the PERM, they have to file the I-140, and while you are the one that's filing the I-485, they have to hire the lawyers to help you with that. So it's a lot of money, a lot of work, and a lot of bureaucracy that they are going through in order to get you into the US with a green card. With that being said, if immigration and green card is your number one priority above all else, I would pick your employer wisely because there are some employers that are probably more willing to do the green card sponsorship than others. My company in particular gave me immigration assistance basically on day one. Like I said earlier in the video, I started work on August 30th, 2021. And then by September 11th, so like literally 10, 15 days later, I was already filling out forms for immigration. Next couple of questions are all kind of tied in together with the TN visa versus the H-1B, and also kind of talks about the employer. So I'm going to hit all of them kind of rapid fire at once. Question number one, what are the benefits / risks of going from H-1B to green card versus going from TN visa to green card? The benefits. If you're going straight from TN to green card, this is going to be faster than going from TN to H-1B to green card. The downside or the risk of going straight from TN to green card is number one, the timing around when you have to do everything. Because the TN visa can expire, you have to renew. And on top of that, there is timing intricacies on when you have to travel and not being able to travel during the adjustment of status process until you get your advanced parole. And on top of that, I'll also throw in this immigrant risk. Again, like, even though my story was successful, I'm not sure if that's the status quo or if I got lucky or anything really about this topic more than what I went through with my personal experience. Now, if you went directly from H-1B to green card, like if you came into the US on an H-1B or an L-1, then the process is much better because you're able to travel during that last stage of the I-485 because you have that dual intent visa. On top of that, you don't have to wait for the 90-day rule, I'm pretty sure, because of that dual intent. So in those circumstances, the H-1B and the L-1 is strictly better than the TN. Just in terms of green card process, there are drawbacks between the TN and the H-1B. But if you're talking about transferring from a TN visa to an H-1B to a green card, there's going to be an additional amount of time that you have to wait before you get your H-1B. Because the way that the H-1B works is that it's on a lottery system. And again, with the USCIS, there's only a certain amount of H-1B visas that they give out per year. So you're essentially in this lottery system waiting to get your H-1B. It could take 1 year, it could take 2 years, 3 years. So if I talk personally from my own anecdotes, I went to school and within my friend group, we had like 10, 15 guys. Majority of them went to work in the US, and majority of their companies made them switch to H-1B before applying for the green card. And of all of the people that went to the US at the same time as me, I'm the only one that currently has the green card. Everyone else has not been approved for their perm yet. Now, with that being said, even though going from TN to green card is probably faster, and even though it does have more risks, a lot of employers are not willing to do that. Which again, since I said earlier in the video, since they're sponsoring your visa and your green card, they are the one who has the final say. So like I said a little bit earlier, if green card is your number one priority, which honestly I don't think it should be, there's a lot of other factors that come into play with the immigration process in the US versus Canada. But if it is, let's say it is for a second, you should really consider which employer you're going to work for and see what kind of benefits they provide in terms of immigration. Now, based off my experience, I know that some companies will let you go from TN to green card right away. Some of those companies, off the top of my head, Microsoft, I know Riot Games will let you go from TN to green card right away, as well as Stripe. But on the other hand, there are companies that will force you to go H-1B first. Some that I know off the top of my head, Meta, MongoDB, Google, I'm pretty sure Amazon as well. But again, I'm not sure. I don't have friends that work at every single big tech company. So if you work at a big tech company, you have some insight on this, or you just work at any company in general that knows if their company offers immigration assistance or what level of immigration assistance they have, please let me know down in the comments. I will basically make what I just said as a highlighted comment, reply to that, and I will edit my comment so that we can keep a long list of companies that provide some sort of immigration assistance. So I just want to reiterate one more time that your employer matters a lot when it comes to your green card. If it is something you're really gunning for, I would do your research as best as you can and be selective and try to prioritize companies that have that sort of assistance. The job market is very tough right now, so it's kind of hard to say that and be like, just, be selective with who you apply for, blah, blah, blah. But just my 2 cents here. On top of that, you are not able to switch companies once you start your green card process unless you want to restart from the very beginning. So keep that in mind when you're applying and when you're considering the green card, because there's a lot of factors that come into play. Next question, how did you get your TN visa in the first place? And how did you convince him to sponsor you to get your TN visa in coming to the US? I actually converted my internship from Canada to full-time in the US. So I never had to apply for a company in the US and fill out that questionnaire of like, do you need immigration assistance, blah, 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 blah. On top of that, my TN was pre-approved by USCIS, so I never had to apply for a TN at the port of entry. So there's a lot of gaps that I have here in my knowledge when it comes to applying for a TN visa, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really relying on the comments here to help me out with this question and, answer it. I know there's been a lot of discourse online about what do I have to answer for those immigration questions. I have a video kind of talking about it, and you can go search this on Reddit. People have talked about it a lot. So you can go make your own decision based off what other people have said. Next question, can you get side income on the TN visa? Answer is no until you get either your green card, which I guess at that point you don't have a TN visa anymore, or you get the EAD. Can you switch jobs with an EAD? The answer is no. You cannot switch companies with your EAD, but that doesn't mean that you can't switch companies. Like I said, you can look up the AC-21 or I-485 portability, which means that you can switch companies after 6 months of waiting for your I-485 being applied for. But with the EAD, you can also get side income. So like I said, YouTube, if you want to Uber on the weekends or like look after dogs or something, dog walk, that is available and okay with the EAD, with the caveat that your company that you're currently working for is okay with that and you're not moonlighting or breaking any rules. Next question, was I able to travel? The answer is yes. I was able to travel a ton with an approved I-140, with an approved PERM, and you can look at all the stuff before in the video to see. One note I will make is to get a Nexus card as soon as possible because it makes inter-US and Canada traveling as easy as possible, but to not use the Nexus at the kiosk, you have to go talk to a person at the gate, because if you use the Nexus at the kiosk, like at Pearson, for example, they're automatically going to put you as a visitor's visa, which is really annoying to change. So please make sure if you use your Nexus, talk to the person at the gate. Next question, why did I not go with H-1B first? Answer, I did not make the decision. The lawyers decided to do TN to green card for me. Luckily they did, but again, not my decision. Next question, will I apply for citizenship in 5 years? I don't know yet. There are definitely drawbacks of being a US citizen for sure. I know that sounds crazy to say, but there are. Especially if you are trying to retire in Canada, you have to pay double tax, et cetera, et cetera. There's an exit tax. So there are some things that I definitely have to consider, but luckily I have another 5 years to figure it out at least. But one thing I will be doing is logging every single flight in every single place that I have lived from now until I guess 5 years from now, or I guess the rest of my life, just because I know that it's going to be important when I eventually, or if and when I eventually file for my citizenship. The next question, why did I decide to get my green card? And this is kind of interesting because I'm actually pretty critical about getting the green card. I think that there's a lot of drawbacks or different opinions that you can look at for the green card. And a lot of people go into the green card process not realizing a lot of the intricacies with the green card and the drawbacks and the different things you need to know. But with that being said, there's a lot of things going on in Canada right now. The dollar is really, really bad. There's a housing crisis. Groceries super expensive. Monopolies everywhere. The job market is not as good as the US is. So for those reasons, I think that having a US green card and the potential to get a US citizenship allows me to have a hedge against Canada, even though I still view Canada as my home. Additionally, I also want to have the ability to sponsor someone in the future with my US green card now that I have it, but that's something that I'm going to explore a little bit later, and maybe I'll make a video about it, maybe not. Like I said, there's a lot of good things about the green card, but a lot of things that a lot of people don't realize once they start the process. Now, while the green card is really great for my personal situations, there are a lot of reasons to actually not get your green card. And if you're curious about those, you can watch this video right here where I go over it.